Thank you so much, and I'm honored, and it's a pleasure to be able to open the HCCH Securities Convention track. Thank you all for being here today. Without further ado, let's get going. What presentation would not have a disclaimer in it? But we always have those, and you know how it is in terms of anything we can say or do is disclaimed, but just kidding. I'd like to go through an agenda today. I was asked to talk a little bit about the reflections on the purpose, the operation, and the uptake of the Securities Convention, which we'll go through, and then talk about some cases for study and discussion. And this is something where, as the Securities Convention track starts, maybe these are some areas that people could consider looking at also as a part of the Securities Convention remit. And then finally, I'll cover some suggestions for the next steps of the Securities Conventions. I'm happy to take questions also if anybody would like to address any questions to me through this process. So without further ado, I'm sure all of you know what the Securities Convention is, but just in case you don't, the Hague Securities Convention is an international multilateral treaty. It is intended to remove globally any legal uncertainties for cross-border securities transactions. Now, work started with the Securities Convention in 2001. And then on the 1st of October 2017, the Securities Convention came into force following the ratification by Switzerland, Mauritius, and the United States. And obviously, members of the HCCH were also very integral in putting the Securities Convention together. So work has been in place since 2001, and it came in force in 2017. And I think the work and the world has changed, especially with COVID, with the introduction of many new areas and new products that have come out, and we'll talk about that in a second. At the time, the convention was basically a response to the holding systems for securities, which in the past were a purely direct holding, like you would hold your shares. But then, of course, as time changed, as firms got larger, as international investment banks got larger, there was more and more of a mixed direct and indirect holding system for securities. The other area where the whole securities market has been changing is that now, of course, intermediaries exist between investors and companies that issue any particular security. So if you're holding that Tesla share, you may be holding it through a huge brokerage, or you may have taken a physical scrip yourself, or you may be holding it in a trust or in a fund. So the world has gone on in terms of from 2001 when work first started and where we are now. The other area is the Securities Convention may have created uncertainty as to the application of the laws in relation to cross-border securities transactions. And that may be because of the private law aspect of the Securities Convention. And then finally, the development of a globally agreed method of determining the legal regime governing any such transactions lagged behind market practice, leaving the financial markets with possible legal risk. Now, I used to work at HKEX, for example, and most of the national exchanges would very much say, look, your securities are traded on my exchange, and therefore you must follow my rules. And that's one of the things in terms of areas that the Securities Convention may need to think about in terms of the impact of the national and governmental rules of exchanges that obviously trade and have listings of securities, and also effect cross-border securities transactions. On a more simple approach, the Securities Convention is a very complex piece of work that would, in all probability, take potential member countries a long time to consider its applicability, how it would relate to its existing laws, and in some cases, some countries have just taken it and moved it into their legislative arena, whereas others may still be studying it. And that may be one of the reasons why the take-up has been a little bit slow. We're currently at 3 members, but I mean, in terms of encouraging people to get more involved, that's something that the Securities Convention writers might want to take a look at to explain the applicability to potential member countries. And then finally, it may not be clear to those countries with developing laws and rules, well, how do I best properly implement the Securities Convention with our rules and then enforce the laws and rules? It's not really apparent exactly which parties or what parties are going to be covered in the home country's implementation. It's sort of difficult to see which parties basically would be benefiting. So, of course, overall, if we had legal clarity in transactions for cross-border, then of course everybody benefits. But that might be an area, because when, of course, you're working and you're a regulator trying to make sure that your markets are protected, you want to know who you're protecting. So national exchanges that govern the securities transactions and their rules over securities, as I just discussed, prevail. They and global securities regulators, IOSCO, which is the International Organization of Securities Commissions, they would be really key as the regulation of securities transactions are governed by these bodies and for each national economy. So IOSCO basically meets together to discuss key issues, and this would be a good place for the Securities Convention to actually work with IOSCO as a potential participant in any work. And then finally, with the development of DLT, or distributed ledger technology, blockchain, CBDCs, which are central bank digital currencies, as well as tokenization and decentralized finance, the evolution and structure of everything, securities, finance, digital asset markets are evolving. And the interesting thing is you're seeing all of these markets come together as huge investment banks set up desks for DLT, for tokenization, for digital asset trading. And you're seeing traditional, crypto players also move into traditional securities through tokenization. So what's happening is the markets are all evolving and converging even faster. And what you're seeing is, how will these assets be regulated and by whom? And this is something that I think all the regulators around the world are actually wringing their hands and figuring, how best can I regulate these areas as they cross over? So I've just given you some of my thoughts of the Securities Convention. Maybe we could talk a little bit about cases for study and discussion that the Securities Convention may be able to think about and consider in their additional work in attracting additional uptake, or maybe in reviewing the Securities Convention as a whole. So I thought I'd talk about Hong Kong, where I come from. And as a young regulator at the SFC, I got put on the scriptless project, and I worked on it for the entire 7 or 8 years I was at the SFC. It's been a 15-year script to scriptless journey, and we're still not quite there yet. But Hong Kong still uses physical share certificates. Yes, we have them in stacks. Most people actually take those script and put it in a safe deposit box. They are also deposited in HKEX, the exchange's clearinghouse, through the clearing corporation. But most people, to save on the custody costs, just open a safe deposit box and put their stacks or their jumbo certificates of scrip in the safe deposit box. Our first moves to move to a scriptless dematerialized market started in 2002. And it culminated in changes in 2015. However, what we found is the work, although a lot of work has been done, has largely gone quiet. There are a number of vested interests or interest in moving towards scriptless, but there's equally other interests to keep things the way that they are. Although a great deal of work has been done, it's sort of gone quiet. So my question is, with the plan of dematerialization not really moving, well, we now have tokenization. So maybe we should think about moving from dematerialization and moving straight into tokenization. And we'll talk about that in a second, as there is a very good use case. And we should also consider a convergence of the securities markets and the blockchain. And we'll talk a bit more about that. In an article by the Trader magazine that was published on the 25th of January, a survey of many financial market participants thought that most securities would be settled on the blockchain in 5 to 10 years. And you're already seeing that happen. Here's an example of Wedbush Securities that joins blockchain-based Paxos for its settlement services. This is an article that was in Bloomberg. There was articles in various magazines about ICE, Intercontinental Exchange, buying tokenization platforms. You've also heard that Australia, ASX, has been working on a clearing initiative using the blockchain. So there are semblances of this moving together, as I said, the convergence of tokenization of the blockchain in financial services. And you're seeing it now with exchanges. And I think where the real uptick will happen and the takers will happen is if traditional exchanges start understanding and using the blockchain as the next step for accounting for what are currently physical securities that would be moved on the blockchain. So that would be a great step forward in terms of everything would be on the blockchain, which is immutable, which I'll talk about in a second. Just stepping back for a second, understanding digital assets for so that everybody's on the same page. Before I talk about tokenization, let's talk about just the types of digital assets that are in place right now. Well, you have, of course, Bitcoin, which actually was founded by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009. It is very much a digital native cryptocurrency that's mined. It is a very controversial coin in itself, but it is the first of the digital assets, of which many assets are now built upon or use the background of Bitcoin to build the blueprint. Second would be the Web3 virtual assets, which are also digital native and cryptocurrencies. And then you're seeing a move into tokenized financial instruments, which are digital native as well as physical native. Tokenized financial instruments include equities. They could be public markets. They could be private markets. We're seeing bonds and funds. We're seeing apartment buildings tokenized, and you're seeing property tokenized. And that is what I was thinking in terms of for Hong Kong, from moving, since we're scriptless, why don't we stop from script to scriptless? Let's get rid of the scriptless and then move directly into tokenization. So hence this discussion. Just some more fundamentals. Digital assets are digital currencies that are secured by cryptography, and you cannot counterfeit them. That's one of the reasons why tokenization would be very important, because you cannot counterfeit or double spend them. If you lose a share certificate, you have to go through a great number of steps to ensure that you get your new script back, and you have to report it as lost and to the police that it's been lost. So with the blockchain, that would actually make it impossible to counterfeit. And how it would operate for tokenization, for example, it would be on decentralized networks based on the blockchain and a distributed ledger that would be kept by a disparate network of computers. Now, currently, digital assets are not issued by any central authority, rendering them immune to government or interference. But as I said now, A number of exchanges, a number of international organizations are looking into tokenization and tokenizing products themselves. So the status is, yes, in the beginning, it was not issued by any authority, but now governments or exchanges could use that as a possibility. Usage, form of payment, and availability at any time. Digital assets are available at any time. They are not printed on paper, and Bitcoin, for example, would be mined using computers to get to them, but tokenization would be, or tokens would be available at any time based on the exchange. We've talked a bit about Bitcoin, which are utility tokens, so I won't go back into that area, but I'd like to discuss securities tokens and digital securities, which can start their life in a physical or digital form and then get tokenized. So bringing traditional assets on chain, and that process basically would be smart contracts and token accounts. So tokens would be blockchain recorded assets that represent ownership. And the blockchain network, which a securities exchange could have, would have this network of computers that would keep all the tokens in one place. So tokenization is already happening now with fractionalization, and it's actually added enhanced liquidity and enhanced reconciliation. And what you're seeing is, with tokenization, a tamper-proof digital record, as well as efficient accounts and identity verification. This is something that physical script never had before. And also the ownership, and we talk about through the Securities Convention about ownership. The blockchain would basically make it very, very clear about ownership. And these are some of the reasons why I'm discussing this here for the Securities Convention to think about in terms of expanding their remit. So the second wave of tokenization is even moving faster using the Internet of Things, and you're going to see continuous monitoring, real-time auditing, and digital transformation that's coming from this. And you're already seeing it happening in terms of tracking around the world. And the unique value proposition is that you'd have internet connected devices, which would make it easier for people to access information as well as their assets. So that sort of ends the first discussion of moving from scriptless to possibly tokenized, from script to scriptless to tokenization. The second story I'd like to talk about is a tale of two linkages that the Security Convention can think about. It's a tale of two linkages. It's the HKEX Stock Connect, which connects Shenzhen and Shanghai markets with HKEX, versus the ASEAN trading link. And I understand the Securities Convention also talks about collaboration and cooperation. And the ASEAN trading link, which started in 2012, was exactly that, to break down barriers to cross-border securities trading and offer a single point of entry into the largest three ASEAN markets, which were Stock Exchange of Thailand, Bursa Malaysia, and Singapore Exchange. And it was expected that Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia would also take part, which all form ASEAN. However, the trading link didn't prove very popular and was closed down by 2017. And the reason it wasn't popular was because they never connected the rules or the clearinghouses. They only connected through counterparties. So I'm XYZ broker in Indonesia. I connect with a broker in Thailand, who then connects with a broker in Singapore. But there were never any changes to the custodial or to the exchange mechanisms to allow for trading between the three exchanges. It was only connected through counterparties. And for those of you who know and work in the securities industry, if you're a local broker in Hong Kong, you're going to try to attract additional clients from around the world by putting together linkages with other brokerages. So that's the first thing you would have done. And so when this was actually put in place, it was a little bit too late for everybody. And they already had those linkages in place. And it did not turn out to be very popular. So they ended it in 2017. And I have been asked before to talk about ASEAN versus Hkex's Stock Connect, which I'll bring up in a second. And why is Stock Connect still thriving? And why did ASEAN Trading Link stop? So I've told you why ASEAN's Trading Link stopped. Let's talk about Stock Connect. And basically, you've got the Trading Link, which basically launched the Shenzhen and Shanghai Stock Exchange linkage with HKEX. And their success, if you look, basically you will go straight through with mainland investors. They can trade directly on Stock Exchange of Hong Kong through a tunnel that allows the clearinghouses and rules being connected and work in sync. And the Bond Connect was then launched after that. So this collaboration basically allowed for a harmonization of markets. And there were clear agreements, there were home rules that applied. And what happened between Shenzhen and HKEX and Shanghai was that all the regulators and the exchanges worked out all the difficult issues, including merging, separate trading, clearing and settlement systems. And we also even had, of course, differences in currencies because the renminbi versus Hong Kong dollar. And all of those were worked out and making the collaboration and cooperation much more harmonized. And because of it, it became a very important part of connecting China to the world and the world to China. So this is where they worked out all the difficult issues to work on the background of the exchanges and launched that as a solution. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about in terms of thinking for the Securities Convention is central bank digital currencies and the cross-border recognition and implications. So currently, I don't think people have really started thinking about the digital central bank digital currencies. They are beginning to launch. You've got the Bahamas Sand Dollar, you've got joint projects between Hong Kong, China, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Norway, New Zealand, US, UK. So all of these different countries are going to launch or are launching. Now, how will those CBDCs be used? What are the applicable laws? What about cross-border recognition and enforcement? And that, I believe, has a very clear linkage with the securities track and with the digital economy track. And the two will be overlapping each other even more as the securities and financial markets evolve. So this is something I would leave to the Securities Convention to think about if it would like to expand its remit there. So finally, some suggestions and next steps. With the development of DLT, blockchain tokenization, DeFi, decentralized finance, and you're seeing the evolution of the securities and financial markets moving even faster, I would suggest that the Hague Convention may wish to consider a review and update of the scope and the topics of the Securities Convention to deal with some of these changes that I've discussed with today, or consider new or other convention streams. You may want to also think about, for the Securities Convention, a study on the jurisdiction, cross-border recognition, harmonization of markets, and the clear agreement and enforcement on applicable laws for the securities markets and how it relates to DLT, blockchain, and so on and so forth. Also, as a part of its review process, it might want to consider simplifying the Securities Convention with maybe more plain English and determining who is covered, who is protected, who will benefit, and how best to do this simply for countries who wish to take part in the Securities Convention. And then finally, in terms of international cooperation, the Securities Convention may wish to consider more inclusion and consultation with international regulators. In particular, IOSCO and the World Federation of Exchanges, as well as national exchanges and market participants. Courts, I noticed that my learned colleague from Hong Kong, the HKIAC, is also here. Arbitration mechanisms and courts would also be people that are establishments that might want to take part in thinking about the next steps for the Securities Convention. So I've said a lot and covered a lot in a few minutes. I'm happy to take any questions that participants might have about the Securities Convention or some of my thoughts. Thank you. And on behalf of, I'd really like to thank HCCH for inviting me here today.